Okay, welcome everyone to episode 25 of RATV. This is actually a re-recording of our intro and disclaimer. We had some technical issues with the original recording, so if all of a sudden you see a hard stop and different people are on the screen and we're talking about something different, that is why. But I'll go ahead and quickly give our regular disclaimer and a quick intro on the topics today. So RA Capital, we're an investment firm regulated by the SEC. So while we may mention specific companies or programs, those are not to be taken as investment advice. And then additional disclaimer for today is that RA Capital provides financial support to No Patient Left Behind. And that's a good segue to our intro. We're doing things a little bit differently today. Normally, we will focus primarily on the latest COVID news. We'll talk about the data and what the implications are. But today, we're bringing in a group, which I mentioned, No Patient Left Behind, which is a nonprofit that focuses on making prescription drugs affordable to Americans. And they're going to just talk about what they do, what their mission is, and we'll spend the majority of time with them. Before that, we'll have a quick introduction from Peter Kolchinsky from RA Capital. He'll talk about the recent Aduhelm sort of controversial approval and just use that to kind of set the stage and provide some context for some of the work that No Patient Left Behind does. But with that intro, I will actually play a quick video. And then once that video is done, we'll jump to the original recording. So that may be a little bit choppy, but hope you enjoy it.
Most of us pay for health insurance, even while we're healthy. You may need that insurance when you're sick, injured, or have a chronic disease. Many insurance plans make people pay high out-of-pocket costs for prescription drugs, even for medicines that your insurance plan explicitly agrees are necessary for you. Not everyone can afford those costs, which is a real problem that requires insurance reform. Fortunately, most people get the medicines they need. We usually pick up drugs at the pharmacy, but where do they come from? Pharmaceutical companies employ scientists and researchers investing lots of money to discover and develop new medicines. It's not easy to discover new drugs. Most of the time, these projects fail. We're fortunate that some succeed. Without insurance, there actually would be very few new drugs. That's because to cover the cost of all that risky research, the few successful drugs have to be expensive. Too expensive to afford without insurance. By buying insurance, we're spreading the cost of all that innovation across everyone, not just sick people. But that doesn't mean that insurance will pay any price drug companies want to charge. Insurance plans negotiate, usually getting a rebate off the sticker price. Those rebates can be 50% off or more. But if your insurance plan sticks you with high out-of-pocket costs, it may feel like you're not insured at all. Sometimes insurance plans negotiate down a drug's price, but make patients pay more. That extra money goes to the insurance plan. What kind of insurance is that? Some think Congress should pass price controls for new expensive drugs, but the truth is that most drugs are only expensive until their patents expire. After that, other companies can sell generic copies, so drugs already have a natural built-in price control. Passing price controls on new medicines would result in fewer new medicines, less hope for better treatments and cures. Overall, 90% of prescriptions are for generics. These older, inexpensive drugs make up only a few percent of overall healthcare costs. They were once expensive branded medicines, but now they cost much less and yet still work just as well. Drugs that are expensive brands today, and even drugs that haven't been invented yet, will someday go generic too. So the real benefit of all that innovation that we pay for through our insurance plans is an expanding pharmacy of brand and generic medicines that keep us all healthier and out of hospitals. They'll even help our kids and grandkids. Health insurance can be expensive, confusing, and overwhelming. And yet, the right solution is pretty simple. At No Patient Left Behind, we believe for insurance to really be insurance, it should fully cover the drugs your doctor prescribes when you're sick, without high out-of-pocket costs.
Okay, now we started recording. Might have to record the intro, Mike, to this when we post this online. Um, so the If you think about cancer, it used to be that the FDA demanded a lot of evidence that a drug extended survival, and it was a very high bar. And meanwhile, physicians, researchers could see that these drugs were shrinking tumors and delaying the progression of the cancer. And it would take years to find out whether it extended survival. And the FDA it sort of took in the totality of evidence that it was seeing and said, you know what, let's start coming up with a faster way to approve drugs. Let's give them accelerated approval on the basis of tumor shrinkage and maybe durable tumor shrinkage. Show me that you've shrunk a tumor and that it stayed shrunk for a meaningful length of time, and we'll approve the drug. And you can start selling it or whatever, but you have to also do the clinical studies to show us eventually whether it extended survival. And what came of that was an acceleration of drugs getting to the market, and the vast majority of them have proven to actually be effective, right? Like the FDA made a great judgment call there. Then a number of years ago, not that long ago, maybe like what, five years ago or something, 4 years ago, the FDA made a really controversial call approving a drug for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, DMD, an exon skipping oligo that barely, if at all, increased the production of this missing protein, dystrophin, that's really important for muscle function. And in the company's clinical trials, they couldn't show that these kids walked, a better or longer, or kept their ability to walk. And a lot of people said, how could the FDA approve this drug when it, plausibly might be doing nothing? And the FDA defended its action and said, well, we see a signal of efficacy here, and we think it's important, to give this to patients. They're kids that are progressing rapidly, and maybe this helps them for a bit, and maybe better drugs will come later. And they did the unusual thing of releasing FDA internal communications back and forths that they were having, because there were people within the FDA that were really disagreeing with one another. Some that wanted to approve, others that said, I'm going to quit if you approve this, terrible drug. And what you could see is that some of the people in the FDA were concerned that if they rejected this drug, Sarepta would go out of business and they would chill innovation in the space. And so this was, an inkling that we had that the FDA is aware of how investors and our entire ecosystem respond to, the FDA's sort of setting of its bar of how permissive it's going to be, right? And at the time when it sounded like the FDA might approve it, I actually was, trying to rally other investors and even executives to sign a letter that I had written saying, look, FDA, it's really important that you stand on science. Do not get pushed to, basically lower the bar to the point where science doesn't matter and you're just trying to cater to patients, whatever they want. Because the only thing that, anchors me to any reality as an investor is science. If you tell me that it's going to be patient pressure that, gets you guys to approve stuff and science doesn't matter, I guess I should be directing my funding to companies that master patient advocacy, and that would be kind of bad for the quality of drugs that we get. Well, I couldn't find very many people that were willing to sign that letter. A lot of people agreed with it, but they weren't willing to sign it because they were afraid of the blowback, that patients would view that as a negative. And yet I didn't mean it to be a negative for patients. I meant it to be a way of preserving the quality of the drugs that were being approved for patients. But in any case, we didn't publish that letter. We didn't have the necessary support, for it. The FDA approved the drug. And the thing is, after a number of years, I realized I had been wrong and the FDA had been right. That drug did not stop others from attracting patients to discontinue that drug. They knew that it was a weak drug, that it maybe doesn't work. And they were willing to discontinue using that FDA approved drug just to enroll in clinical trials of drugs that might be better, even though they would have a chance of getting a placebo. And so this idea that if you approve a bad drug, that it will now forever be in the way of enrolling patients into trials of good drugs, that was an important test for me that showed me that that's actually not true. And Heidi and I met because we were both on the board of a company that was able to enroll patients get them off of Exondys and onto our company's trial. And to really like show how far we've come, we now have data with much better versions of those kinds of drugs. So peptide conjugates. We've even got a company that just recently closed a large private round to develop exactly this, that shows that they can get much greater levels of dystrophin increases. So if previously people said, I don't know, this stuff doesn't work at all, and the FDA said, no, we think it works a little, and that you could probably get it to work better, they were right. By conjugating, by attaching delivery mechanisms to these oligonucleotides, you were able to get a lot more of them to the muscle and enhance what was previously a small effect. And now it's clear as day that it is possible to meaningfully increase the amount of dystrophin that these kids' cells are making. And so I would argue that the FDA was right. They applied their oncology thinking to DMD, and they seemingly lowered the bar. They spurred innovation. They did not prevent people from enrolling in clinical studies of new things. And now they turn their sights on Alzheimer's, and they did it again. And they saw a signal there that a drug was working, plausibly working. We don't have proof that it really, addresses dementia, but it plausibly could. And maybe it doesn't. They're taking a risk, right? And that's the thing. It's great to see that the agency is willing to take a risk. We think of government agencies as just sort of like, fearful, cover your ass, like just don't ever be proven wrong, and yet you can't possibly do that, with innovation. You have to be willing to take a chance. You got to be willing to have egg on your face, or worse, that people will relish the opportunity to dance on your grave, right? And you have to be confident that you're going to survive that mistake and, and go try and do something right, tomorrow. And of course, with Congress, looking for every way to show you that you screwed up, that's a lot of pressure. So the FDA took this chance. And again, what are the arguments you hear? Oh, this is going to shut down innovation. This is, going to result in a bunch of terrible drugs, now being approved. Nobody's going to bother running good studies in Alzheimer's. They'll just try to show that they can, sort of reduce this biomarker. And that's it. The FDA's bar is lower, but that's not true, because anybody who follows, Biogen has to do a study itself to confirm the efficacy of its drug. And then everybody else that wants to file for approval based on this same precedent, they're going to have to show that they aren't just running the bare minimum study needed to file for approval. They're going to need to show that they've run that study and they've teed up the bigger study. They've started it, even maybe fully enrolled it. And then the FDA will say, okay, well, we'll give you accelerated approval too, knowing that the full phase 3 clinical trial, that train has left the station, and it's just a matter of time before we get the result we need. So you're going to see a lot more studies in Alzheimer's of these kinds of drugs. And indeed, it may take Biogen 7 years to run a study with its drug, because a lot of patients may say, well, why would I enroll in the study of Aduhelm, where I might get placebo, if I can just get Aduhelm, and have it paid for? But for all these other drugs that aspire to be better, you're going to have to, forego Aduhelm and enroll in a study where, yeah, you might get placebo. And I'm confident that will happen. We've even funded a company that is going to do exactly that with a drug that is similar to Aduhelm, but different in that we think it's not going to cause the kinds of side effects that you see with Aduhelm. And so that will be its offer to patients. Hey, I can't say that I'm FDA approved, but here's why we might be better. Will you take a chance on us? And there's so many patients out there. We think that they will be able to enroll their studies. And so over the next several years, we're going to learn about this class of drugs. And if 3-4 of these drugs all fail to show that despite improving the biomarker, they can't also improve, cognition, the actual outcomes of Alzheimer's. If they basically say like, yeah, we're improving the biomarker just like Aduhelm does, but we don't work, to actually help the patient, then physicians and patients are going to look at Aduhelm and they're probably not going to say, yeah, but that's FDA approved, I'm sure it works. They're going to say, yeah, maybe this type of drug doesn't really work. And so society's not really going to be blowing $50,000 across 6 million patients with Alzheimer's. What is that, $300 billion a year, completely blind to the emergence of new data that comes. In several years, if other drugs like Aduhelm aren't generating confirmatory data, you'll see Aduhelm probably, become a very weak selling drug and eventually will get taken off the market. And in the grand scheme of things, that's okay. That's how we learn. Some things we learn before FDA approval, other things we learn after. So that's the context that I would encourage anybody to sort of view the FDA's decision. And it's the kind of thing that No Patient Left Behind is set up to try to explain, right? We launched this organization. My colleagues at RA Capital launched this organization right after I published my book, The Great American Drug Deal, in order to try to make a case for the need for insurance reform to solve affordability, but also, when Congress says, but what can we get from the drug industry, to help pay for that? We want price controls. We would say, well, no, not price controls. That would kill innovation. We can explain why, but ensuring that all drugs go generic, that's the way it's long been done. That's the price control every drug ought to have. It doesn't hurt innovation. You might want to consider that. So these two ideas, right? And we recruited some really great people into No Patient Left Behind, some of whom are here with us today. Peter Rubin is the executive director of No Patient Left Behind, and I'm going to let him actually tell you about his journey, but he has worked in Washington. He's worked at an insurance company. He's worked at a small biotech company. It's rare that you come across somebody who has that kind of a background and can ultimately, weave all those kinds of experiences together. Heidi Wagner is a member of the biotech industry, has worked in various biotech companies on the market access side, which is to say, figuring out how patients actually get effective drugs, once they're proven effective, the entire insurance gauntlet. And Gunnar Esiason, who is a patient advocate himself, and a patient himself, has experienced, as somebody born with cystic fibrosis, and experienced the progress of better and better drugs coming to the market, can speak very personally about the impact that that's had on him and people that he's known. And his family has led a foundation for many years, fighting for cystic fibrosis progress. And having people that come with this kind of disparate set of experiences together around one board to try to figure out, how do we explain how innovation happens, the duality of insurance and innovation. There's kind of a yin yang, right? Like, they're presented as if they're in opposition, but you won't have one without the other. I mean, would you buy insurance if there was nothing actually worth getting when you got sick? No. Like, insurance has its value because of all the stuff that you can do, to treat diseases when you get sick. And could you have innovation if there weren't insurance? No, because if we couldn't count on many patients being able to afford drugs with prices like $10,000, $50,000, $100,000, then we wouldn't, be able to, justify investing in them. And so it's all made possible because the actual paying for these drugs is collectivized at the societal level through insurance. These things are like just true. They're basic economic truths. You can't escape from them. You can't wish them to be different. They simply are. And we come together, representing different facets of this ecosystem, and we brainstorm. How do we, teach this, credibly to the kinds of people that hold the fate of this ecosystem in their hands, right? So with that, I'd like to turn, the podium over to Peter Rubin to lead us, on an, through an introduction really to No Patient Left Behind and how we're attempting to guide America towards productive reforms. Peter.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for that kind introduction and your insights as always. And Gunnar and Heidi, thank you for joining us tonight this afternoon as well. I do want to point out that in addition to the qualifications Peter mentioned, Heidi is an excellent skier. And Gunnar has his own podcast, State of Health. So I highly encourage you to subscribe to that as well. He's had some esteemed guests like Peter Kolchinsky on it before and others, but I definitely would recommend, in addition to Gunnar's work as a patient advocate, he does have his own podcast, State of Health, and highly recommend it. And as Peter mentioned, and I think I'm going to share my screen here. I'm the executive director of No Patient Left Behind. My background is in healthcare policy. I've worked in the House, the Senate, biopharma industry, as well as the insurance industry. And over the years, really developed sort of that keen interest of how do you actually get things done to help patients? And that really is every year you have all this noise, and you have now I think up to 6,000 bills that get introduced each year in the Congress, but less than 0.1% actually become law. So what are the things that we can do as members of the biopharma ecosystem, tech ecosystem, to actually make a difference and help patients, in addition to preserving those innovation incentives? So what I thought we'd do today is sort of have a conversational view of what the outlook looks like for federal policy as it relates to prescription drugs, and how the potential implications for patients and innovators at a level that I think is hopefully conversational and not too weedy, as well as not too banal. So with that, we thought we'd just sort of start with a few key takeaways. And I think the first and most important one, Gunnar, is really, why are we talking about this issue at all? And what is this wow factor?
Yeah, thanks, Peter, and thanks to RA Capital for having us on today. But I come from the world of rare disease. I live with cystic fibrosis, and there's no secret that when new drugs are approved for conditions like CF or any other rare disorder, the first thing that makes a headline, the first thing that makes that catches a patient's eye is the list price for a new drug, right? There's no secret that they are enormous because they're treating very small patient populations. And I think that wow factor that we're talking about right now is something that is just like jump off the page as someone living with a rare chronic condition that is already financially strapping in a lot of cases, right? And my my point of view on this is that I think oftentimes that list price is conflated with the out-of-pocket burden for living with the disease. And whether or not that's true or somewhat true or not true at all, it is the prevailing notion that I think drives some of the animosity from patient communities towards the industry. And for me personally, that it does it breaks my heart. It really does. Simply because my own journey with CF has been so severe. When I graduated from Boston College in 2013, I was very much on the highway to end-stage illness. I was in and out of the hospital, multiple times a year. I was, on the receiving end of medical interventions every other month, if not more frequently. And then Trikafta comes along, the clinical trial in 2018, changes my life in a matter of days. And then next thing you know, I have to think about, oh my God, what do I do with the rest of my life? Because it was just suddenly unlocked, right? And it went off to grad school. That was the first thing I could think of. Then I got married, and now my wife and I are expecting a baby in December. So 3 pills every single day that has a wow factor list price has changed that in my own way. That to me shows the value of what we're talking about and why it's so important that it really does need to be protected. And my story is not unique in the CF world in any way whatsoever. It's the general story that's now being told in what was once considered a child illness.
I think that's such an important reminder that whenever you talk about these issues, you talk about from the perspective of the patient first. And I think that personalization and what's driving this debate and what policymakers here is, the anxiety around, we want these innovations to exist. We're concerned about the pricing, and to your point, folks still are concerned about the difference between the list price versus the actual price that an insurance company charges you when you purchase the drug through them. So I think that's just sort of what's driving this debate And I think it's always important to remember that. Secondly, I think it's also important to remember, despite all the noise you're hearing, there's no guarantee that anything gets done this year. And I think, Heidi, you're pretty good about, reading the tea leaves. And I just wanted to sort of level set that where you think we are in terms of the policy outlook this year.
No, I appreciate that. But real quickly, just anecdotally, I reminded Gunnar last night that the first time I met his family was in 1998 when I joined Genentech, and we had the first cystic fibrosis product available called Pulmozyme. And now there's just been, to your point, Peter, there's been so much innovation since that point that actually there's discussion about how to take Pulmozyme off the market now. But it really, it was just really kind of an interesting full circle story that, that now he's expecting a baby. But yeah, so the tea leaves, the tea leaves are very difficult, right? And I do come at it. So my background has been primarily government advocacy for the pharmaceutical industry. I did early on, as Peter knows, worked also on the insurance side. I lobbied him when he was in the Congress for many years. So I have a little bit of foot in both. And I do look at it more from kind of the Republican perspective in terms of just, where the Congress and the House sits. I think this year's interesting. I think there was an immediate assumption that there would be a lot that could be done because of the fact that the House and the Senate were controlled by Democrats. And we, of course, have President Biden in the White House. And not surprisingly, it's not that simple. So the margins are very, very close, as you all know, in the House as well as the Senate. Razor thin in the Senate. And so it's really not a given that anything substantial will happen. I do think that the industry itself is very supportive and clearly would like to see an elimination of out-of-pocket costs for Medicare beneficiaries in particular. And that, of course, brings them squarely into the debate from a, well, who's going to pay for it perspective. I don't want to get too nerdy on this either, but there's a couple things that are going to happen very soon that I think will dictate or has the capacity to dictate a lot of the scope of what might be possible. And that's not to get too detailed, but there's going to be a budget resolution debate and vote. And the Senate is going first versus the House, which is actually quite unusual. Usually the House starts versus the Senate. And so the Senate is going to go first on this. And what people need to understand is the budget resolution will actually set out really the rules of the road for how to proceed on certain issues. In other words, can some of these issues be taken forward through reconciliation? The importance of that is that if we can move some of these provisions through a reconciliation, that means that the Senate only needs 51 votes, whereas they normally need 67 votes. So that'll make it very, would obviously make it easier for certain provisions to actually get through the Senate versus having a filibuster. The Republicans are really looking now at the budget resolution kind of as the fight. And Kristen Sinema, who's a Democrat from Arizona, you may know, has actually been pretty vocal about not appreciating and not supporting some of the very big numbers that are being talked about in terms of authorization. So there's a chance, a small chance, that there could be more limits put in place in budget resolution that could actually narrow then procedural options that the Senate has to actually pass something. Similarly, in the House, I think that
Heidi, can I just ask?
Yeah.
I'm lucky to have you guys teaching me this stuff as I go, but I'm sort of empathic to the range of backgrounds of the people that are listening to this. Can you just
explain,
calibrate whenever you say some stuff like that? Can you say, and what that means is price controls probably won't happen because.
Right. So I think that's really important. So in the Senate, and I didn't want to make this a civics lessons, but it is really important because, as you may know, the Affordable Care Act was passed under very procedurally specific rules. So the Senate would want to actually, you can proceed, you can advance legislation through reconciliation if it's tax related or if it's really entitlement program related. So it's pretty obvious that there could be, to the extent that something is Medicare or Medicaid related, reconciliation would be acceptable. What's important about that to the listeners is, again, that means you only need 51 votes to pass something, whereas things that are outside of budget reconciliation require 67 votes. So when you have the margins as close as you do, it's very unlikely then that anything would pass if it had to go outside of reconciliation in the Senate. Does that make sense, Peter? So what's
Yes,
important
yeah,
about that is,
so reconciliation is the big threat, to us, right? And so it comes down to, do you think
it's the threat and the opportunity, right? If we see any legislation as a threat, then it's a threat. But if we see some legislation as an opportunity, it could be an opportunity. Where I think that reconciliation will cause challenges is certainly, and Peter Rubin can speak more to this, but what the Democrats right now are really thinking of in terms of modifications to pricing in the drug industry aren't limited to Medicare and Medicaid only. They would like to see them apply to the commercial market. That is unlikely to be doable in a reconciliation context. So, there could be.
And so here's what that means. So that's
that employers would not benefit. Yes.
Well, that's one way of looking at it. But the way I would say is, something like HR 3 might make us say, all right, well, forget about cancer, because it's mostly a Medicare market.
Yep.
But diseases like cystic fibrosis or sickle cell, actually, would they
sickle cells have Medicaid? Yeah, it's not. Yeah.
Is Medicaid going to be covered by that, or
yeah, Medicaid and Medicare, because their entitlement programs are legitimate.
Gotcha. Okay, so forget cancer and forget sickle cell disease.
Yeah,
but cystic fibrosis or migraines or MS, diseases that are mostly covered by the commercial payers, those are fair game.
Yeah.
So in the end, what we're basically doing is, already Europe pays a lot less than US commercial plans do. Already Medicaid gets an automatic 23% discount, so pays less than American commercial plans do. Medicare, now wants to pay meaningfully less than commercial plans do, and already gets certain, sort of benefits where it pays less. Though obviously for cancer, it pays a lot more because people are older. And so in the end, you're going to see, innovation in this world, supported more and more by American, workers. The ones that are buying commercial insurance plans. So whatever diseases and needs they have are going to be what all of us who fund innovation will focus on.
Yes, it's very concerning for a company that has a very high patient population that are federal program focused, either Medicare or Medicaid. And my point in raising this is I just wanted to give the audience a little bit of an appreciation for, in addition to policy, there are really important procedural issues that are actually, that are an undertow to, and could be very impactful in terms of what actually does happen. And then it's all going to really boil down to money. I mean, so I was saying in the House, there's also a growing number of members in the House that have communicated to Nancy Pelosi that they don't want HR 3. And Senator Menendez, for example, in the Senate, has also indicated in his caucus that he's tired of taking votes that kill his industry. And so he wants to look at others. So, the close margins in both the House and Senate are making things very interesting and could actually mean that we end up getting very little. But I'm not saying that's what's going to happen. I just wanted to give that kind of background, that it's not clear just because there are three-party, that the House and Senate and White House are all democratically controlled, that's just an easy path to passing a lot of things.
It's really helpful insights, Heidi. Thank you. And I think what's interesting is that, whenever we're talking about these issues, you have patients in need of assistance, and you have Congress fighting over these procedural rules, these politics. They're focused on differentiating from each other. They're not focused on necessarily helping their constituents. They want to, win in 2022, the House, the Senate. So but I think there's good news underlying all this as well, is one, yes, there's going to be talk about big reforms, but there's also the opportunity for small fixes along the way, such as fixing the issue of copay accumulators through regulation, as well as, hopefully fixing the ability for patients to use manufacturer coupons in Medicare. And, and Gunnar, do you want to talk real quick about what a copay accumulator is? And why
absolutely.
It's so important?
Yeah, I think I mentioned, a few minutes ago, the out-of-pocket burden and its sort of separation from the list price. And really all I see that is what I'm calling an unfair tax against patients with chronic conditions, because you have to continue to go to the pharmacy, you have to continue to use your coverage to buy drugs, but the coverage almost stops just short when you're saddled with an out-of-pocket payment, right? It's you have to pay your out-of-pocket up to your out-of-pocket max or your deductible or whatever kind of plan that you have. And more frequently, patients have been benefactors of copay assistance from pharmaceutical companies to help alleviate that out-of-pocket burden, right? It makes sense, right? The pharmaceutical company wants the patient to be on the drug. The drug wants the patient wants to be on the drug that will presumably keep them out of the hospital or presumably keep them healthy. Now you have insurance companies that are sort of finding out that that copay assistance sort of releases the burden of the out-of-pocket cost that comes along with out-of-pocket drugs, and they're instituting these policies called copay accumulators that sort of do two kind of things. One, it actually blocks the patient from reaping the benefit of the copay assistance program, but it also actually results in twice the revenue when someone uses a copay card, right? So the short-term cost or the one-time cost of using it will be lower, right? So let's say you have a $100 copay, and the copay accumulator or the copay assistance program will come in and pay $70 of that out of pocket for you. With the copay accumulator, the patient is still paying that $30 that will be taken off from the copay assistance card, but the $70 will not be able to go towards the deductible or out-of-pocket max as it used to. So you're actually doubling up on the revenue on the back end. So what I see that as is a link to the inability for manufacturers to use copay cards for people who are on Medicare, right? So people who are on Medicare cannot use them because the federal government sees it as a kickback to sort of entice a patient to use a branded drug. So I think when I want to say a small fix, is it really that kind of small? Yeah, it is, but it's a meaningful fix because it alleviates that unfair tax that is copays with drugs.
And I think the reason why it's so important to highlight is because you have this big conversation going on about legislation with all these fancy words like budget reconciliation, debt limit, end year appropriations. But you also have this annual cadence of the regulatory process where you have CMS, HHS putting out rules for the exchanges, putting out rules for Medicare, and there's opportunities to actually for advocates, and particularly MPLB, to not only work on these big issues, but work on some of these issues that can have a meaningful impact on patients through regulatory reforms, not just legislative reforms. And I think just a real quick segue to sort of who MPLB is and what we're doing and why. And Peter framed at the beginning, it's really about how do we help patients, innovation, and society, and doing that by reforming insurance, making sure that if a doctor prescribes a medicine and your insurance company authorizes it, that you actually can afford that medicine through a low out-of-pocket cost. It's a very simple calculations. That's the whole point of insurance. And it's the need for proper insurance and insurance reform to ensure that patients access those medicines at an affordable cost is something that MPLB is very focused on. At the same time, as Peter mentioned, you can't just have the way you want it in perpetuity. And to the extent that you can help preserve this biotech social contract is to make sure that all therapies go generic without undue delay. And do it in a way not only for medicines that we're accustomed, but also these scientifically complex ones such as cell and gene therapy, where it's going to be harder and harder to copy. And the concept of contractual genericization is an issue that we've been pushing, so that you can take a pound of flesh from pharma, but do it in a way that actually preserves the net present value of innovation, and does it in a way where you're taking the back end and not taking away that innovation hustle, that drive for bringing new therapies to market, and the incentives, the ability for development stage companies to get investment. So that's,
well, I really want to reiterate there, Peter. No, I just want to, sorry for jumping in, but reiterate in my 20 plus years of lobbying on behalf of the industry, first at Genentech and then Alexion primarily, that was such a vital part of the discussion with Congress, which is, the reason that, some of these drugs cost what they do is that ability to maximize and the expectation that there will be a lower price that society benefits from. And there was very much an understanding of, I don't think, Peter, we called it then the social contract, but there was an understanding that there was that trade-off. And I think what's happening now is we're just not seeing that in all areas where it's important. And I agree. I think this is a very critical and practical, conceptual way of introducing that, kind of fulfilling that promise, but also introducing a far more market-oriented approach to price rationality, to rational pricing versus the government abjectly trying to weigh in and say, thou shalt not have a list price, a launch price greater than X, or all the different things that they've been considering.
Yeah, and I'd quickly like to just jump in. I hate to plug my podcast here, but I had a patient advocate living with cystic fibrosis in Canada on this show a few weeks ago, and he was talking about how the regulators there in Canada are fighting with drug companies about accessing CF drugs for CF patients, and he pretty much inferred that there was a delay tactic from the Canadian regulator so that the drug is launched closer to the point in time when it would become generic. Right, as a way to sort of extract as much value as they could from the government's perspective. But if you're living with a progressive disease like cystic fibrosis, any day lost is one day lost that you're just not going to get back. So these are things that are definitely happening around the world that we may not be touching and feeling right now here in the U.S.
Absolutely. And I can just confirm that I've done a lot ex-US, and there's very much an attitude of delay. Every year that something's not approved is a year they don't have to lay out the money.
I think that's the exciting role that MPLB is playing, because the reality is that we're one of the few, or probably the only organization really that's out there that really speaks from the innovator perspective and the investor perspective. The development stage company, the investors, the folks who are actually looking at the 100 different companies, determining which ones that actually should be invested in and help them make it through the regulatory process. And so, by involving stakeholders and from the investor community to really understand how a drug actually makes it from the garage to actually the pharmacy, that's really where I think MPLB has a unique voice in this debate that differentiates itself from pharma and bio. While we are aligned on the broader issues, I think the facts and explainers that MPLB brings to help educate policymakers and staff from that sort of real firsthand experience is very unique and very valuable. And so, if you think about our key activities, we've got a whole work plan around, building the case for insurance reform and against price controls. And we've been doing it by shaping testimony. We've got animations that we can show you at a later date. We have an annual, weekly out-of-pocket report that sort of tells patient stories from the perspective of, the need for insurance reform, not the need to price control drugs. A second effort that we're doing and helping fund is really an insurance without out-of-pocket cost coalition being led by an insurance reform advocate named Wendell Potter, and really creating a steady drumbeat over time for the need for insurance reform. The need to cap Medicare Part D out-of-pocket costs, yes, but also lower deductibles, also to make sure that that if you're going to cap out-of-pocket costs, it should be monthly, not just annually, making sure that if a drug is prior authorized, that there's zero copay. And what I think has been missing in the past is that you have sort of grass tops groups that are formed to meet the needs of a specific legislative debate of the year, but not that steady coalition that we're building of innovators, but also patient groups, providers, and consumer groups, which will be a very unique voice in this debate, in addition to MPLB's. Then lastly, I know we're running out of time, but also what I think the amazing sort of thought leadership that Peter's bringing to this as well is really saying, how do we take a look at not only solving the problems from insurance reform, from the patient perspective, but also helping the industry explain the value of its drugs, and not just taking ICER's math or CADIS and Canada's sort of view of the world, or PBAC in Australia, but how do we actually take a look at the value of medicine and bring in concepts like genericization, bring in concepts like caregiver spillover, where you really can do a better job of calculating the true value of medicine and doing it in a way that shows the broad consumer surplus that actually is achieved through innovation during the time that a drug is on patent, so that when it goes on generic over time, that you're actually seeing society benefit overall, not just payers. So that's sort of what we've been up to at MPLB. I don't know if Peter, you have any additional comments, or Gunnar or Heidi, or if there are any questions from.
Yeah, I just want to add to that point. I think that the work that we're doing at MPLB on ICER is vital to really be able to break down the fallibility of that system and the results, the very kind of bastardized results that come out of it. And one of the things that we know Senator Wyden's, Chairman Wyden's team is working on is looking to potentially reference price products to ICER at, pricing estimates, which is, of course, could be very, very damaging. So I think that the work is tremendously valuable, and nobody's doing it. So that's a terrific project.
Yeah, I agree, Heidi. I think I've written extensively about my feelings for ICER and some of these, back of the napkin cost effectiveness analyses, and how they especially devalue people with disabilities or chronic terminal conditions. And I think it's just like a sickening thing when you sort of look into it. And I think as a result of, the emotions that are tied into that, patients are sort of seen as like, just complainers or people screaming without any sort of skin in the game beyond, just like the health of a human being. So I think one of the things that I'm most proud about at NPLB is, the effect that we are hopefully driving in understanding the value of a human life, the value that drugs can return to human life, and that, patients are sort of front and center in sort of everything that we do.
So I would like to ask, really, I feel like the goal that we're trying to achieve with some of the wonkier work that we're doing with, trying to change the way that people do cost effectiveness, which is, by the way, something that we're trying to do in order to change even the way that our own industry looks at the value of its products. It's not like we as an industry are aligned around how do you mathematically demonstrate the value of a drug. We have not up until now had to do that. America didn't demand that kind of calculation. We were just able to say, look at the demand for our products, and payers are willing to pay, and it's not like people calculate what the value is of everything that they buy before buying it. Like they sort of do that calculation subconsciously or internally in their gut. Like, let's leave it to that. That's the market. And now we're seeing this, demand. It's like, no, I want to see the math externalized. And our industry is unprepared. It has not given that much thought. And I'm hoping that when we finally do that math, that what we're able to do is convey it in a way that gets patients and patient advocates to say, hell yeah. I mean, I felt that this drug was worth it. It was profound for me, or it was profound to the people I care about. And now I understand why it's worth it. Yeah. I totally get, that drugs that used to be expensive now are generic and they still keep me healthy. That's valuable. I never thought of it as paying off a mortgage on something, but yeah, that's a cool value of a drug. I never thought about how, not only is this drug helping, my child, but our whole family is better off because our child's not going into the hospital as often, right? I never thought about it as I saw my sister, get MS, and I wondered, oh my God, am I going to get MS, when I grow up? And then, but actually seeing that my sister was well managed, that the drugs really helped her a lot, made me feel less scared about that MS. What is that called? Well, ICER and NICE, they never counted any of these things that I just mentioned, but they're visceral reactions that we all have, ways of valuing a drug. And what we're hoping is that patients will start to, and really everybody starts to say, yeah, I totally get it. Drugs are so much more worth it than I thought. I never had the words for it. And now I do. And therefore, when they start, when patients and patient advocates hear about, some drugs supposedly having a high price and NICER say that it's overpriced, that instead of saying like, gee, I do want this drug, but I guess these pharma companies do charge too much. I would hope that now patients and patient advocates are equipped to push back and say, that's nonsense. You've completely ignored the, numerous ways in which this drug has made my life and the life of other people, better. You've ignored it so egregiously that, we think that you're probably, grinding some political axe. You can't possibly be blind to all these values when so many people have told you about it. And we would love to see a repudiation, essentially, of ICER and NICE and this kind of oversimplified math by people who are equipped to make that case that these products have value. Only then do I think Congress will say, maybe we're sort of siding with the wrong camp here.
Yeah.
Right.
What
and
about
right
the
now,
value? Sorry.
And I just worry that right now, patients don't know how to reconcile the disparity between I want this drug, but geez, it doesn't look like it's worth it. That's terrible.
Yeah. I was just going to add to your list just the value of being a productive worker later and actually contributing to the tax base and being less of a burden on public programs. There's just so many elements and benefits that derive that are not considered.
And what's exciting as well is that the studies that we're funding now are really going to help as Congress and the administration think about these issues and think about developing regulations in the coming years. By funding the research now, creating this critical mass of data, of peer-reviewed studies that can really shape the implementation if it were to arrive in a way that does it from that societal perspective and not just that ICER perspective. And so as Heidi mentioned and others mentioned, like we really are the only people doing this right now. And hopefully we're building momentum across not just researchers, but manufacturers, so that we can get ahead of the debate and not just respond to the debate too late 2 years from now. So really appreciate the leadership that Peter and his colleagues, the members of the board, Heidi and Gunnar, are bringing to this debate as we try and tackle sort of these three major building blocks at NPLB. So I don't know if there are questions or Michael, what's your
Yeah, no, I think most of the questions that have been put in the chat have been answered. If anyone has any last minute questions, feel free to throw those down in the question and answer session. We'll try to, or the question and answer feature down at the bottom of Zoom. We'll try to either answer that live or in the chat. But I think we've answered most of them, unless there's questions for anyone on the panel here currently.
So while we wait to see whether anybody types in a question, in the Q&A related to price controls, insurance reform, contractual genericization, all the things that we've talked about. I will note that we're getting some questions about COVID and boosters. And so in the last 6 minutes, barring any other questions, I figure it's fair game to actually address that. So we're looking forward to at least Pfizer, I believe, relatively soon, I believe maybe sometime in September, getting a formal FDA approval for its vaccine. I'm sure Moderna will get something similar. And I believe that that's going to make it easier for businesses to mandate vaccinations. Right now, you can mandate flu vaccines if you want as a business, but those have full formal FDA approval, and businesses have functionally mandated. We've got examples of businesses that have functionally mandated vaccinations, but you can see it. There's a discomfort there because it's like, well, it's technically emergency use. I mean, can we do that? Is that like experimental? So when you get a full approval, it's going to be easier for mandates. And when you start seeing that, like, states maybe will mandate that if a restaurant wants to keep its liquor license, it has to check IDs at the door to confirm that, in New York, I guess they have this Excelsior app, that is your digital vaccine passport. And, restaurants will do anything to protect their liquor licenses. And so when people who are unvaccinated discover that they can't go hang out with their friends at their favorite restaurant or bar unless they get a vaccine, for some people that will be a motivator, and they'll get it. So you'll see things like that. I wouldn't be surprised if some states basically say like, okay, well, if that's federal law, we'll simply allow paper passports, which of course are easily forgeable, right? As a way to allow, strident anti-vaxxers to resist and still not get their shots. So, I'm sure you'll see that. There's some people who are asking, when can I get my booster? So probably, first of all, I don't think anybody who got their vaccine, even at the very beginning, like in December of 2020, should be terribly worried right now that, oh my God, I haven't gotten my booster. I need a booster right now. Yes, your immunity wanes, but you're still substantially protected against severe disease, hospitalization. So nobody should assume waning means complete waning of the protective abilities of these vaccines. It just means that when you set the bar, really low, where you just say any kind of infection, yeah, you can clearly see, waning protection. But if you set the bar at, something really serious, protection lasts longer. But it does look like, you're going to want to probably get an annual booster, right? And so we're approaching the mark, as we get closer and closer to December, where people are going to be 1 year past their vaccine. And it just makes sense to think like, hey, that's when we should do boosters. And I think that when you get full approval for initial vaccination and, you've got enough data on boosters that the FDA can grant some sort of expansion of that approval for boosters, I think that by the end of this year, people will be, getting boosters if they want, and hopefully they will want it, because even mild COVID, is not fun. I think that there's going to be some tension around the idea: is it fair for Americans to be getting a booster shot when there are people around the world that haven't even gotten their first dose? I think that you're going to see that in the press. I don't think it's going to stop Americans from getting access to a third booster shot. I think one thing we've all learned amidst this pandemic is that in the face of an external threat that ought to unify the world and cause, sort of tribalism to recede and for all of us to pull together, we all are incredibly tribal and nationalistic, and everybody for themselves. So, I guess feel fortunate that you're in America, because when America keeps all those boosters for its own people, its people will have access to those boosters. But it really is just that much more important that we get more vaccines out there. And people keep asking about Novavax. Again, we're not offering stock tips or anything, but just today, Novavax announced they've got a contract with Europe to put out 100 million doses soon, and then another 100 million doses later in Europe. Those are promising signs to us that vaccine is moving along, and they've got it to being able to make like 2 billion doses. That'll be nice to have in the global supply. And there's other companies like Sanofi that are making progress. So the world ought to be awash in vaccines over the course of 2022, and that'll help everywhere. And then we'll move into a post-pandemic sort of peacetime annual booster market, and again, hopefully combined with a flu shot eventually for convenience. So that's how we think that it's going to evolve. We think that for now, the boosters we'll get will probably mostly be the original strain, because when you get a shot of just that original strain vaccine, your immunity is so strong that it covers you for all the variants that are out there. It's not that critical to evolve the antigen to match the one variant of concern at the moment, Delta. So that's good to see. It means that the immunity you're getting is reasonably broad. But in the future, it may be that the vaccine evolves with the variants, right? I think it's an interesting game we can play to find out how far into the Greek alphabet we'll all be in mid-22. Raj and I were just going through it. He took me further in the Greek alphabet than I'm familiar with, but we were somewhere into like mu, and hopefully we won't get to omega. So send us your favorite Greek letter. We'll see if you're right come July of 2022.
Mm.
And with that, I guess we should wrap up. Let me see here. Actually, were there a few? There were a few questions that came in. One here, I believe Heidi mentioned that politicians in the past understood the trade-off between high initial cost of a drug, but a low once generic, but this is no longer the case. What has changed? What do you think, Heidi?
Sure,
Why don't they appreciate it?
I don't think it's no longer the case that they don't understand it. I think what's happened is it hasn't been fulfilled, right? So there are products now that arguably should go generic, and a lot of these, of course, will be on the biosimilar side or the biologic side that just hasn't. And so I think it's not that. I think there's still a belief that that's an okay trade-off as long as actually the other end of it is actually upheld, which is of course why we've been talking at MPLB about a way of actually effectuating that when products actually don't go generic. So it's a fair expectation. I think the expectation is still there. So I don't think people have lost their belief in it. They've lost their faith that it's actually occurring.
Yeah, I would add, if people want to learn a lot more about this, go to nopatientleftbehind.org. But I think that the people that are in Congress now, a lot of them are new.
Yeah.
They have not had to think about this. They certainly nobody that was in Congress back in the 70s and 80s when what turned out to be the Hatch-Waxman Act was being discussed and debated and then passed in 1984. None of them are around.
No.
I mean, really, really old timers, right? And then the last time this issue came up again and was turned into law was the Biosimilar Act. That was 2010. There's been plenty of turnover since then. And so the question is, what happened to the apparatus that teaches that, the merits of that? And I think maybe part of the problem is that our industry, as it has enjoyed the easy street of milking some old drugs, maybe it's kind of not bothered to invest in that apparatus. Hey, let's not teach how awesome it is that drugs have their own built-in price control, that they go generic, because some of them don't, and that's kind of nice for us. And so we call that rent seeking. That's not good. We call that kind of thinking landlord thinking, right? As opposed to a builder that would happily build you a home and get paid in the form of a finite mortgage, right? That then ends like a drug going generic. And so we make the point that the split in our industry is not between bio and pharma anymore, biotech and pharma. Everything's biotech and cutting edge these days. It's between, the builders that would gladly, see insurance reform be passed and paid for by making sure that all drugs go generic without undue delay. It's between the builders and the landlords that are kind of enjoying the rents that they're collecting. And unfortunately, the major organizations that are out there that are the apparatus by which we teach our value proposition and lobby for it in Congress, they get most of their funding from companies that at the moment are milking some old drugs. So, that's creating a bit of a problem. NPLB is, emerging from people that are very much in the builder camp. So we're more liberated, to speak to the biotech social contract. All right, we're 5 minutes over. Thank you very much for joining us for this very first, mostly non-COVID episode. And we will have more like this. And I'm sure we'll be hearing in the future from Heidi and Gunnar and Peter Rubin as we make progress, in our mission. And do check out Gunnar's podcast. It's great.
Happy to do it. Thank you, guys.
Take
Thanks,
care.
everyone.
Thanks.